Hello, and welcome to the
Hi.
Comedian's Paradise. This is the podcast where we speak to some of the most inspirational, funny mavericks of the comedy world, where we get an insight into how comedy works with their intellectual and fantastic minds. Now, if you like the podcast, same as before, give it a 5-star review on Amazon or iTunes. If you didn't like it, don't tell anyone. Also, but that's what we got. Now, today's guests has come all the way from Bangladesh to be on this podcast. His name is Naveed Mahbub. He's a man who's been Comedy Central in Bangladesh. He visited the British shores and said that the food was absolutely shit. So that's why he's gone back to Bangladesh. Now, he is a man with many stories to tell, and he's going to give us some great and intellectual insights in the Bangladesh comedy scene. Please welcome Naveed. Way!
Hi. Thank you. Thank you, Marvin. Thanks for having me.
What did you think of my intro, Naveed? I'm sure you received some terrifying introductions in comedy.
That's great. I mean, if you were my audience and I'd be picking on you, I'd just say stick to your daytime job. But no, I'm just joking. And I was there at the British shores a few weeks back. But if I say that I ran away from the food, I'd be shooting myself in the foot literally because now British curry is your national food now. So.
Is it? I didn't know. I thought it was like fish and chips and a full English breakfast, no?
I don't know which era in the British time you're living in, but I thought that it seemed like the British curry had taken over. But jokes aside, fish and chips stuff. I didn't have it this time, but it's definitely always a big attraction for me. This curry is something I am having all the time, anyways. Though I have to say, the curry that you have over there is definitely very different, and it's got its own fantastic flavor, that's for sure. But your fish and chips will always remain the fish and chips, you know. It's definitely a very much a part and parcel of the British food landscape. I will never get tired of it.
Do you have any fish and chips in Bangladesh?
Well, I mean, yeah, that is the simplest thing you can do. I mean, chips is everywhere, what we call French fries. And then we are a country full of rivers, so fish is a very much an integral part of our cuisine. And kind of the way you have it over there, it's not as prevalent to have fish and chips like that, but it's also, we do like deep fried food, meat and fish, all deep fried in batter. So yeah, do have our share of that kind of fish and chips, if you want to call it. We don't kind of serve it as a fish and chips, but we've had it, that combination.
Okay, and one thing I want to say, I want to ask that this is going to put me in dodgy territory, but they say that a lot of chicken shops where they sell fast food chicken wings are run by Bangladesh people, people from Bangladesh. Is that a staple, mate, in a lot of Bangladesh for there to be a lot of chicken shops like there is in the UK?
No, not really. That's more a British thing, I would say. And but we do have chicken, and chicken is something. I mean, not. Let's just put it that way. Not the way you see it in Britain, as you were referring to, alluding to probably, but over here, fried chicken is it's very popular. Of course, you have the big names. The Kentucky Fried Chicken is here, but there are also a lot of the local brands here which serve similar fried chicken. So those are very popular. And grilled chicken, there's another thing called chicken chop. So basically, you take the chicken and you hammer it. Everything is kind of flattened out, and then you grill that. That's also extremely popular over here.
Hmm. And what do I want to talk? Okay, and so being from Bangladesh, what was it? What's the culture like, and how did you become a comedian? Is being a comedian in Bangladesh frowned upon?
No, it's not frowned upon at all. I mean, comedy is something that has been around everywhere in different parts of the world for hundreds and thousands of years. You just have different blends of comedy. Stand-up comedy is another genre, as you know very well, where you're not telling jokes, you're telling giving facts in a funny way, your observations and your points of view. So that itself is not that new. I mean, not that old. That's been around maybe for the last 15 17 years. That's about it. But comedy itself, we've had for many, many years, and people love to laugh. Stand-up comedy, as I mentioned, is fairly new, a couple of decades almost. My wife and I, we actually run a full-fledged comedy club with 120 capacity venue. It's purely a comedy club. We have shows almost every day, and it's become a part and parcel of the entertainment landscape. So it's definitely is booming very well. Not only not frowned upon, but definitely appreciated very well, very much. And to the point that now a lot of corporate events, they love to include stand-up comedy. They want the stand-up comedians to host serious events, you know, like maybe a sales convention. They would rather have a comedian host that show. And I've had my late night TV show on two of the major channels. We've run. I was the executive producer. I was the host and one of the writers for the show. It's just like the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. And I think you have I'm not too familiar with the British late night show, but you know the format. You know, you do a monologue on recent news, and then you have a guest with a live audience. So I've run that show. It's ran 250 episodes over a span of 8 years, and these were very, very well accepted. We've even had uh, comedians from overseas come and perform here, many from the United States. There was one gentleman from Britain. His name is Andy Zaltzman. Maybe you know Andy Zaltzman. He's more into cricket right now. So he was here. He did a show. People loved him. So I'm just giving you a very long answer. If I make a long story short, it's not frowned upon. It is highly appreciated. People love it. They just like this new genre of stand-up comedy.
Okay, and how did you become a comedian? What was your Spider-Man moment where you decided to become a comedian?
Yeah, I got bitten by a spider, a radioactive spider. But I was my wife and I, we were living in the U.S. at that time in Southern California, San Diego, California, and we love to go to comedy clubs. And one particular night, we were at the Comedy Store over there in La Jolla, California, which is was a branch of the main one in Hollywood. And after the show, we were chit-chatting with the headliner. It was a great comic, and then one thing led to the other. And he said, "Hey, you want to try it out? Go talk to Sandy Shore. The Shore family owns the Comedy Store. Sandy Shore is the daughter of Mitzi Shore. Maybe you've heard of her. The Comedy Store where all the big names, Letterman and Jim Carrey, everybody started the journey there. Her dad, Sammy Shore, used to open for Elvis in the 60s and 70s. So, anyways, and he said, go talk to Sandy Shore. She might give you some tips. So I give her a call, and this was before the time when now you see a lot of South Asian comedians, right? And but that time there really weren't many. It was really Russell Peters and one or two maybe. So I gave her a call. She said, "Hey, I've never had a Bangladeshi give me a call about comedy. So why don't you come over?" So I did a couple of workshops with her. So I basically spent a couple of months with her. She mentored me, and that's it. That's how I started doing open mics. And in 2007, I went to the Las Vegas Comedy Festival, what they call the original Las Vegas Comedy Festival, and I became the best male comedian at the Play Vegas stage. And then I said maybe I should get serious about being funny. And since then, I've been doing it professionally.
Okay. And what's the process like of becoming a comedian in Bangladesh? Because I think it's very different to the UK or America, I can imagine.
Well, actually, it's not different. It's just very, very much the same process. You start with open mics. That's really the only way you start, and then you get stage time. You work your craft, and that's it. That's how it is. We just don't have as many. In fact, we're the comedy club that my wife and I run. That's the only proper stand-up comedy club in the whole country. And there are a few rooms here and there, but anybody wants to start stand-up comedy, come to the open mics, work their craft, get a lot of stage time. Once you even have 3 or 4 minutes of type material, we put them up on the featured weekend ticketed shows, and then that's it. That's how you go. The same as you do it in the UK and the US everywhere.
But is it, do you do it in English or do you do it in Bangladesh? What's the language
Bangla
that?
is our language.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Bangla. So mainly we do it in Bangla just because not that many comics prefer to or are comfortable performing in English. But we have really about three, four, five comedians who perform in English. I perform both in English as well as in Bangla. That's our language. And it's only natural and that the scene would flourish in the local language. As you're seeing in all different parts of the world. I've performed in 30 countries and sure, over there I've performed in English, but you could tell the local language dominates the comedy scene. And it's only natural that that would happen because stand-up comedy is really about hanging out. It's not telling jokes. You know, you're on stage, you're hanging out with your audience, you're actually speaking the truth about your observations, your points of view, your experiences, and and then the local language is where you're more comfortable with. So the we have shows every day, once a week. In fact, today, Saturday, is when we have the English shows. But 6 days a week, we have shows in Bangla. But the format is the same. It's just the language is different.
Okay. But is the way you do jokes and is slightly different? And have you noticed that audiences over in Bangladesh laugh at slightly different things than those in the UK and Australia? Is there a slight difference? There is a slight difference, but it's
Well, I mean, what is different are the contexts or the references. But if you look at the style, stand-up comedy is, again, it's not about telling jokes. It's not, as you know, of course, is that stand-up comedy is not about two men walking to a bar. Stand-up comedy is about, okay, fine, I was having a chit chat with Marvin, and then you guess what? We had a power out. It's a true story. Then you exaggerate. So when we are performing here in Bangla, it's exactly the same thing. You're doing stand-up. You have the setup, you have the punchline, you have the segues, you have the callbacks, you have the exactly the way you would do it in London. The only thing that is different are the subject matter. I mean, if I'm doing stand-up comedy in Bangla, and if I'm saying, you know what, I was at the tube station in Trafalgar Square, people they will understand, they'll find it funny, but it's not that funny because, why do I care? Like I'm not, it's not relatable. You see what I'm saying? The same thing when I'm doing a show in London. I'm not going to say in Dhaka City, I was stuck in this traffic jam. And people in London will say, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I mean, why do I care? I mean, it's not relevant for me. Stand up comedy, even in the UK, it depends on where you are. Are you in the south? Are you in the north? Are you in Edinburgh? Are you are you in Birmingham or are you in Paris? Your references are what change. Your references have to be relatable to the audience. That's the only thing that's different. Otherwise, it's the same thing. I mean, I can show you a clip of 5 minutes of stand-up comedy in Bangla, and you may not understand the language, but you can see this is exactly what I'm seeing at the comedy store or the Top Secret Comedy Club or at the Edinburgh Fringe. Style is all the genre is the same. It's just like many languages have blues music, the 12 chord progression. It's just the language is different, but you still are doing the 12 bar chord progression in blues music. That's really what it is.
mm. Short answer is it's the bloody same, but there's only slight different. People are people.
Again, it's not even slightly different. It is the same. What is different are the references. That's it. The topic. Like as I was saying, I've performed in 30 countries. Now I did the most recent one was again in Melbourne, in London, and before in March I did a show in Novi Sad, Serbia. Not even Belgrade. It's a town which is an hour away from Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. Now I did stand-up comedy there too. But the topics I chose to talk about are what I felt would be relevant to my audience because you laugh at a joke when it is relevant. So, Marvin, for example, you're in London, I'm in London. It's been a very hot day in London. So I go on stage and I talk about, oh, it was so hot, I was sweating like a pig. You will all laugh because you're all victims of the same circumstances. So that's what I'm saying. The topics simply change, but other than that, stand up is stand up is stand up. It is exactly based on the same grammar.
Mm. And one of the things I want to so with what's with things being more or less the same in terms of the UK and gigging in 30 countries, with Bangladesh being a slightly smaller scene than the UK, what are the good things and bad things about it being a smaller scene? Because I noticed with comedians in Singapore, perhaps in Malaysia, the progression to bigger, tougher gigs is a lot quicker, whilst in London the progression is a lot slower because it's bigger. But I mean, iron sharpens iron. But then again, you need those experience to learn how to play those things. So, what's your answer to what I've said there?
That's it's just market economics, supply demand. That yes, it's a small scene, and therefore to get into the big leagues here is can be easier, can be quicker, just because there isn't a big enough a pool of comedians. But it's also a question of degree. Let's say if we have grade ABC, and if you have grade ABC in the UK, it will be unfair to say that the British grade A and the Bangladeshi grade A are at par. They are not, because it's a question of degree. I don't want to use the term champion of mediocrity, but you're a champion of a smaller pool over here versus in Britain. I mean, you could walk into a very small club and maybe it's a 5 o'clock in the afternoon show on a weekday at a club, but you'll say, hey, damn, that's a pretty good comic who might actually have his own grade A show in Bangladesh. I'm not saying one market is bad or worse or better than the other. It's just the fact that it's supply and demand, smaller pool, and there's a big demand. So for you, as you said, to get, let's say, a corporate gig, if I've got 30 minutes of fairly decent, solid material, I can get a corporate gig. In the UK, you want to get a good corporate gig for a big company like, let's say, Sony or Samsung. It won't be easy for anybody. Somebody may be hustling for 20 years and still not getting there, just because that's a bigger market, it's more competitive. And hence, the quality is also as such that a grade A is really a great global grade A. See?
But on the flip side of that, does the pressure of it being smaller and getting access to bigger gigs also make you better? Because if you don't have the pressure, I know that there's a comedian I interviewed a podcast called Dave Bibby. One of the things he does is he sets himself deadlines to get to, because otherwise he will take ages to do anything. And if he sets himself a deadline or a show or something, that motivates him. And because you in a smaller scene and you put into these bigger gigs quicker, does that also force you to get better because you have to raise your game quicker? There's no like you don't have the option of doing as many new gigs, so you have to burn material quicker and you have to try newer stuff, especially in your club. Like you're there most of the time, so you have to burn a lot of material way quicker than perhaps another comic would, if because it's a newer scene. Does that also make you better as well?
Yeah. So see, I've worked both scenes. Let's say the scene in London or New York City or Los Angeles. These are very competitive. The stage time is commodity, is currency basically. Just to even get 5 minutes at the comedy store in Soho, it's you just don't get it. Here, stage time is much more accessible. So yes, as you're saying, you're burning material quicker because the same audience are coming and they don't want to see you do the same material. So you really are working on newer material because so in that way, the advantage with a smaller market is that you get a lot more stage time, you get a lot more time to practice because clubs are also hungry. And I run a comedy club. I can tell you that we actually just a lot of times have to beg comedians, hey, can you do a gig? You don't have to beg in London. I mean, you just have to say, hey, I got a 10-minute spot, and people are fighting for that 10-minute spot. So here you're begging for it. So the advantage is, once again, you get a lot more stage time. And if you're really a forward-looking comedian, you will make good use of that stage time, and you will record your material, you will review it, and once you get another slot again, which could very well be the next day, sure, try the same thing but repolish it so that you get you really are getting to you're really tightening your set. So again, I'm giving you a long answer. The advantage is that you got a lot of stage time. Advantage is that you can really work your craft. And as you say, you're burning material. So you actually are forced to write more material. And if, even to get to that 45-minute special material, you can actually get there much quicker. That's the advantage. The disadvantage is that you could get complacent because the market is so small. You may just be barely good, and just because there aren't a whole lot of super fantastic comedians, you're the one who's getting called everywhere just because there's a limited supply. And it might get to your head, say, oh, Miyamada, I'm God. The brands are after me, the companies are after me, the private events are after me. I must be God. And then you get complacent and then you stop growing. So that is the disadvantage of this bigger market. But in the smaller market, in a bigger market, you're fighting for stage time. Just to build that 45 minutes, you got to hustle to so many different clubs who's just going to give you 5 minutes, 7 minutes, and you got to piece them together. So it takes a longer time to get to that 45-minute special.
Yeah, and how do you yeah, I think, how do you get yourself out of not being complacent yourself as a comic? What's your way of not making sure you don't do that? And is traveling to different scenes one of the ways that you're able to do it and say like, wow, look at how good that motherfucker is. I've got to raise my game.
I mean, you just that's bang on target. That is the reason I travel, because I'm not saying that I'm God, but I am. I mean, they say I belong to the tier 1 comedy scene. But again, I mean the comedian level. But again, I tell myself, if you think, if this Bangladesh thinks that I am the number 1 comedian, or I mean among the top 5 comedians in the country, maybe I am. But again, it's a question of degree among how many people. So what I do is that I travel, and I have to travel because here I'm performing in Bangla. Population wise, we are 160 million people, but market wise, it's a much lower yield market. So if I'm doing very well in this market, great. But once a month, twice a month, I'm traveling. I'm going overseas and I'm performing in English. And there I'm swimming with the sharks. And I know for a fact the minute I'm in the plane, nobody knows me. I'm not saying everybody knows me here, but a lot of people know me here because I've been on TV, etc. But once the door of the plane shuts, I'm nobody. And then I'm in this foreign land doing a show. I am swimming with the sharks. I'm nobody there. And that's a reality check that, I am now swimming with the sharks. I may be a champion back home, but it's among only a very few people. Here, there are millions of people who are very good, and I really need to up my game. So when I come back home, it's back to the drawing board. Okay, fine. I swam with the sharks. Now it's a little bit of rest and recreation. I'm still going to go work out in my club, and sure, I'm getting laughs. But the thing is, I know that this is a false sense of security. Because once I'm back there, the competition is much, much higher. So that's how I keep myself from not getting complacent.
Hmm. And what have you with for people that don't? This is a completely different question to the ones I've been asking, but for people that haven't been to Bangladesh and don't know about the culture, what is the culture of Bangladesh like? What are the misconceptions, and how does that shape You say humor is different, but what would you say? How does that shape the type of humor you do? How, like the culture of Bangladesh, how does that shape the humor you do, and what are the misconceptions of Bangladesh as a country?
Well, I mean, I don't know what conception you particularly have or the West have, but it's a secular country. It's a democratic country, and if we discuss within the scope of stand-up comedy, everything and anything goes. But a couple of topics are best avoided just because of the environment we live in. Number one is politics. Number two is religion. It's best to not do stand up comedy or humor around those topics. Now, is it that we don't do it? We do it. once in a while here and there, but you got to be very careful. Like in the UK, you can have Rishi Sunak sit right in front of you, and right in front of him or in front of King Charles, you can actually poke fun of them or their government or their policies, whatever. You will not be in trouble. You may get flack, but you will not be in actual trouble with the law, or even worse, that you put yourself in harm's way. That can happen not only here, in many many other countries in the world. So you just have to pick and choose. And politics and religion are really, especially politics, that's where the most fun is. But the fact that we can't do it doesn't mean that we don't have enough topics to talk about. Because my mentor Sandy Shore said something, that there is no such thing as victimless humor. And that's why the term tragicomedy comes. Out of tragedy is comes comedy. You have a, let's say, Marvin, you have a breakup. Well, I don't know if you're married or if you're going out, whatever, but you have a special person in your life. Maybe you broke up. It's a tragedy. You're sad. But once you're over it, you look back, you smirk, and then you actually have a lot of comedy material because you're building on that tragedy. And so over here, we have many, I don't want to use the word tragedy, but we have many, many, many issues. We have traffic to contend with. We have, erratic weather patterns. We have pollution. We have poverty. I'm not saying we're an impoverished country, but that's an issue. We are not as affluent as the UK. So we have a lot of issues and problems. So even if we don't get to do a lot of political humor, we have enough uh, things that are causing pain to people so that we can crack jokes about them and people will laugh.
Yeah, what you mentioned there is a really great thing, and it's something that I found quite, something I found quite interesting. Like, yeah, there's a big thing now in the UK. I don't know if it's in Bangladesh, but there's a people get very sensitive about pushing things close to the bone, and I think sometimes they are correct in terms of the way comedians, some of them are actually pushing it in a way that isn't quite right when they talk about dodgy topics. But in a lot of cases, a lot of times as a comic, we're trying to make people laugh, and we've got to push sometimes talking about things that are painful and maybe even a bit uncomfortable truth that none of us likes to hear, is where the comedy comes from. And like a lot of the good comics like Joey Diaz, he talks about a lot of stuff. Louis C.K., I mean, I wouldn't want him near my daughters, but he pushes the knuckle a bit, and that's what makes him funny. And I think if you're going to play it too safe, yeah, I think you've got to push the knuckle a bit. Whatever performer you are, whether you be a musician, a clown, or comedian, you've got to push the knuckle a bit. And what you said there about tragedy and being able to laugh at things, I think that's what a clown who I interviewed in a podcast said. That's one of the great things about being a performer. What we get to do that the regular person doesn't get to do is we get to make fun of our trauma, and in some ways we get to have it not affect us as much. Whilst a lot of people, they don't get to express that with other people on stage. They have to keep it in, or they have to hide it. They can't joke about it like we do.
I think we're both saying the same thing, and that's where the humor is, when you're actually pushing the envelope. And it really boils down to the fact that it's, we're living in a woke culture, cancel culture, but at the same time, unless you're pushing the envelope, you're just being a plain vanilla comedian. So it's a balance. It's a very thin line you have to walk, and it's really the few comics who know the craft really well, who are able to pull it off. They are able to push the envelope as far as humanly or comedically possible, but at the same time they're cutting through the flesh, but not quite hitting the bone. That's where their expertise comes. But many times, comics who fall short as far as their experiences are concerned, they try to do that and they get totally destroyed because they have not had the experience to execute with finesse. Now, as you was using the word trauma, the that's what I was also talking about, tragedy, and you're using the term trauma. It's the same thing. What I was trying to say is that the two particular topics I mentioned about religion and politics. Politics is something which is very dear to everybody and all around the world. Like you have your elections coming up, and I haven't watched any late night shows or comedy in Britain, but I was there a few weeks ago, and all comics were all they were talking about were the elections and all the politicians, because that is the hot topic of the day, and for many it's also a trauma, because political decisions, the political doings affect everybody. Are you paying more at the groceries? Are you paying more on taxes? Are you losing your job? Or your NHS. I mean, am I getting the right medical care? So these are all trauma which are a direct result of political decisions, and that's why it's such a hot topic in stand-up comedy. What I was trying to say is that in Bangladesh we have many more trauma, which in the West you take it for granted. For example, to have continuous electrical power for 24 hours a day is not guaranteed over here. For you, it's unthinkable. You say, I mean, I've never thought about that. So over here, to not have many, like even in my, I live in a diplomatic zone. It's one of the most affluent areas. I'm not saying I'm affluent, but I'm fortunate enough to be able to live in this area. I live right across the Russian embassy. Even here, there are power outages and you have to run on generators. So that's also trauma for us. It is something that you take for granted. Having pure, we can't drink water off the tap. In the UK, you can just open the tap and drink water. It's safe. It's not safe over here. There are traffic jam is an issue, as I was talking about. It's unbearably hot. Food is contaminated because people want higher, longer shelf life of fruit and vegetables so that their food doesn't rot. But the problem is that we are all having all these chemicals. We are poisoning ourselves. That's another trauma. I can name education is another problem. A trauma. In Britain, you have free education at least up to your high school grade 12 level. It's guaranteed. Here, it's not guaranteed. Having food on the table is almost guaranteed. It's not. So we have tons and tons of trauma over here, which are also safe to talk about. So it's not that just because I'm not able to do a lot of uh, cutting edge political humor, let alone on religious topics. There are all these other trauma which are more painful in our daily lives, and we can actually push the envelope and we can just hit it hard. Everybody laughs because it's the biggest tragedy ever. So, long story short, we don't. It's not that we are running out of topics. We have plenty of trauma, and therefore there's plenty of stand-up comedy material that really drives home. And you can actually be edgy over here. You really can push the envelope over here. You can really cut down to the bone over here without getting into trouble.
Okay. But is oh okay. But isn't there any sort of off limits? I know that in obviously in China you can't say anything about the boss, but I mean, is there lines that you can't cross without getting you into trouble, without anything? What are the lines that you can't cross in Bangladesh?
Well, I mean, I just mentioned the two topics. Politics, you just, even it's not that we don't do about politics, it's just that you just got to make sure you're not really putting down the powers that be. Now, the opposition, make fun of them, not an issue, because the powers that be are happy. Okay, fine, you're doing it. So it's not that we're not doing that. Now, the what is absolutely off limits, it's we not let's then get into the topic of dark comedy. So their dark comedy is defined on certain topics which are universal. This topic, if it's dark comedy in the UK, it is also dark comedy over here. And it's not that people haven't tried out, the comics have tried out, and again, for a lack of experience, they just fell on their faces. Audiences booed them or just say, you know what, that was just in bad taste, because that guy was just plain wasn't funny. So the answer is, what's um, what's off limits topic wise is what you would call dark comedy in the West, and it's also dark comedy over here.
Hmm.
I don't know if I answered that clearly.
You got there. um, no, it's interesting. Um, so with Bangladesh, do you do you also visit countries that are very near Bangladesh? Because I know that a lot of comedians in Singapore or Malaysia, they travel to each other quite a lot. And I know that you put on a show with Naseef from India, another comic. Do you visit other nations that are quite near you when you're performing as well?
In fact, I try to do as much of that as possible because, as I was telling you a little while ago, that at least once or twice a month, I always plan to travel, and it's always easier to travel nearby than, let's say, fly 12 hours to go to London. So the answer is absolutely yes. I go to India, I go to Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore. I haven't done Hong Kong. I've done Philippines. I've done Taiwan, Nepal, Myanmar. Even as if I go a little bit further, the United Arab Emirates. Let's see where else. I just so yeah, pretty well. Indonesia. I've done all these places, and every chance I get, I go there. Again, once number one, it's these are I call all of these are emerging comedy markets. So getting a decent stage time is much easier at these places. They're nearby, financially also works out better. So the answer is absolutely. I go to these nearby countries and I go there as often as I can.
And is there quite a close friendship between a lot of these different nations? Is there quite a
Yeah, more than nations, the 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 comedian fraternity, sorority, whatever we want to call it. That's not just even this area; it's global. If you look at it, just look at the fact that you just told me Nafis was on your show, and I said, yeah, I know Nafis. The globally the community is actually fairly close knit, as you probably know yourself. So the fact that the all these Asian countries are nearby and the scenes are also similarly new, like 15, 20 years, everybody knows everybody. So if you're going to, let's say, if I'm going to Thailand, I probably know all the comics in Thailand, all the clubs. I say, hey, you know what, I'm going to be in town. Say, yeah, come on over. So everybody knows everybody. But this also goes into the UK, and all these 30 countries I performed in. Majority of them were based on word of mouth. Oh yeah, yeah, I know Naveed. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's come on over to your show, things like that. So it's just that it's a small community. Everybody knows everybody. There are all these, like in the UK, you have the UK collective, that's Facebook group. There's one over here in Asia called the Comedians in Asia. So you just put something there, everybody knows. Oh yeah, I'll be in town. If you're in Thailand, they'll say, hey, come on over to Singapore because it's just like a half an hour flight. And so that's how it works.
okay? Um, and what have you had any sort of mad experience recently that's taught you a lot outside of comedy, that's taught you a lot about comedy? And have you had any, what's the biggest moment you've witnessed on stage that's taught you a lot about performing stand up recently? From either you bombing or someone else bombing or someone else doing well.
All of those. I mean, it's not any one particular big incident. It's over time, you observe these similar things. One is that you have to first go onto the stage and read. You have to read the room, as you know. You got to sense who they are, what they might warm up to. And I would see sometimes, let's say there's a comedian before me, and I could tell that comedian went up on stage and just did not do the room, dived into his material and totally bombed. And I knew that from the get-go, that you just can't do that. You have to go up and read the room. So it's not that I've had any major, knock on wood, any major issue where I bombed like there's no, like, I mean, I bombed like there's no tomorrow. I mean, thank God nothing like that happened. And but it's one of those things that you see these all this time. But one of the most common denominator is that, especially every time I'm going to a new country, then it's quite a bit of a homework to see what is relevant over there, and also to be aware about what are the sensitive issues over there. Maybe I think that this is fine over in Bangladesh, but maybe that's a very sensitive topic in Dubai that I should be aware of. So that is one thing that every gig tells me, that number one, like any comedy club, read the room, but more than that, read the culture of that country and make sure that you are very much sensitized to what they're sensitive about and what they're not.
Okay. And for anyone that is looking to find out about you, actually, no, I'm going to ask two questions. And your video's frozen, Naveed. Okay, no, it's there. Right. So this is the bits that I want. So I've got two questions to ask. What would be your perfect comedian, and what parts would you take from different comedians you even know or you're fans of to create the perfect comedian? Like crowd work, would you take it with Russell Hicks? Joke writing, Louis C.K. Like what would be your perfect comedian, and what parts would you take from each comic to build them? And how do people find
Well,
out about you?
I don't think I would. Sure. I don't think I would want to take anything from anybody because then I'm taking his style. It's very, for us comedians, as you know, Marvin, it's very difficult we're not actors. We call a spade a spade. Marvin is Marvin off stage and on stage. Naveed is Naveed off stage and on stage. So I wouldn't use the stage. I'm going to take that style, but rather I would say that who are my favorites and why they're my favorites. Jim
Yeah,
Gaffigan, for example, the reason I really like Jim Gaffigan is that he's squeaky clean. He's a family man. I'm a family man, so I relate so much with him. And he's clean and he takes the most simplest topics and he really makes it so funny and it's a narration. But he doesn't do any crowd work. But there are some comics who are really good at crowd work. So when I'm performing, I am telling my story. So when I'm telling my story, it's like Jim Gaffigan. I'm talking about my kids. I love to eat and everything. So that's Jim Gaffigan. And then I also love to do crowd work because, as I was saying, I got to read the room. And one way to read the room is to do crowd work. You go up and instead of diving into material, you are interacting with your audience. It's like that you're on a date. You're trying to get to know each other. So that's crowd work. I'm trying to think who's very good at crowd work. Um, did you mention Bill Hicks? No, I'm sorry.
I
Whoever it is.
mentioned Russell Hicks. He's a well-known comedian in the
Okay.
UK who's incredible with crowd work.
Okay. It's my ignorance that I haven't seen him or heard of him, but then okay. So let's take that example. So if he's good at crowd work, which I'm sure he is, so that's if somebody's good at crowd work, I'd like to be like that. That not only am I just interacting, but I'm also really on my feet. That every response is witty, and I try to be like that. I'm not. And then there are the parts like Dave Chappelle. He takes you on a whole journey, like 15, 20 minutes. He's talking about one single story or one specialist. Excuse me. One special is about probably this, like his latest special was about his show in Hollywood, which was right after when he actually was attacked on stage. So he's telling a whole single story almost in his special. So I also like to do that because I'm a little older than a lot of comics. And the advantage of that is that you have a lot of interesting life stories. And that you can't say that in 10 minutes or 5 minutes. You need a whole special to talk about this. So that's the Dave Chappelle part I'm talking about. Take everybody along with me on a journey. And this is exactly what my mentor, Sandy Shore, said is that when an audience member goes to see a comic, sure, they're there to laugh. Sure, they want to hear jokes, but they also want to know who you are. Marvin, who are you? What makes you tick? What's your story? They want to hear that story. And I've got all these very unique stories. So that's where the Dave Chappelle part comes in. And then also, I try to make people think about through my comedy. I'm not saying it's preachy, I'm trying to preach or anything, but once in a while, I like to share my story so that at the end of the show, they say, hey, you know what? He had a point to make. And that may make life a little bit more interesting. And that's where, what's his name? George Carlin comes in. Right. He's not exactly rolling on the floor, laughing my behind off, comedian funny. You don't roar with laughter with George Carlin, but he's so crafty with his words. He and again he's the one who can expertly cut to the flesh but quite not hit the bone. So that's also one part I would like to have. So to summarize, the Jimmy Gaffigan simple stories, he's his being squeaky clean. George Carlin, you narrate everybody through a life story. The George Carlin, where you actually make them think, and Mr. Hicks, you just mentioned about where he's really good at crowd work. If I could put four of these together, that's the ideal show.
Yeah, and what you said there about, I 100% agree with what you said in terms of being a comedian. I think also, or of any performer, even with acting, like if you look at the great actors, like Tom Hardy, he has unique qualities that make the roles good. But I 100% agree with that. But I still see that a lot with comedy as well, in terms of that someone tries to be a comic that they like on TV. But the ones that I really admire and that really stand out and that are brilliant, they're very distinctive and they do things their own way. And that is something that I 100% believe in. And yeah, what I said, yeah, you. The question is, what do you admire about different comics? I think I should have phrased it like that. But yeah, it's yeah, I like those. I like those options. I like Jim Gaffigan's McDonald's joke. That is brilliant.
Yes. I mean, Jim Gaffigan, I mean, if you look at that, I mean, it's also the same goes with Jerry Seinfeld. I mean, the topics are just so simple topics. And that's where the brilliance is, that they take such simple day-to-day topics and they weave this really hilarious but relatable story. That's where their brilliance is.
Now, for anyone that wants to find out about you, how do they find out about you? What's the best way to get in contact with you, follow you on social media, or drop you a message?
All of these. This is the age of social media, so I'll do my shameless plug. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on YouTube, and my handle is my name, Naveed Mahbub, or comedian Naveed Mahbub, depends on where I got what. And I'm also on TikTok. My kids joke that Baba means dad. Dad, you're a TikToker, and I never knew that. So these are all the social media platforms I'm on. If you message me there, especially Facebook or Instagram, I definitely respond. And I also have a website, naveedmahbub.com. I've got my email address there. I'm very particular about checking my email every day and responding accordingly. So that's another way to get a hold of me. And I believe my WhatsApp number, my official WhatsApp number, not my personal one, is also on my website. So I'm very, very easily reachable, and I always try and do a good job of responding.
Okay. Well, you've found out about Naveed. I hope you've enjoyed him. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you next episode. I'm trying to get, and hopefully I do this. I've scheduled an interview tomorrow. There's an absolutely lovely lady called Michelle Matlock, who's the first black woman to have appeared on Cirque du Soleil. So she is likely to be the next guest. I hope to see you there, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. You know where to go, and give this episode a review of 5 stars on Amazon or iTunes. And I'll see you guys later.